It seems as if not a day goes by without Justin Trudeau being embroiled in some form of controversy or the other. Trudeau now finds himself in the line of fire for bringing a Nazi to the Canadian Parliament. I'm Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo story. Our relentless focus on the situation, the spiraling situation that's showing no signs of improving between India and Canada remains. On the program today, in moments from now, we'll be speaking to the former Premier of British Columbia, also the first Indian origin politician to occupy that post. Now, before we introduce our guest today, let's put into context the latest controversy for the Trudeau government, bringing they thought a hero to Parliament, but he turned out to be a Nazi. A Nazi was given a standing ovation, and after the outcry, the Speaker of the Canadian Parliament had to apologize. The opposition is gunning for Trudeau, calling it a serious lapse of judgment. Trudeau is, at this moment, really suffering from low popularity numbers. Some believe that that could be linked to why he decided to ratchet up the allegations that he's made against India, linking India to the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Khalistani terrorist. India has denied the allegations. The Americans are calling on India to cooperate with the Canadians, and we simply do not know what might happen next. What we do know is this. In India, there is huge, pretty much bipartisan support. In fact, one of the most viral speeches on this issue has come from a Congress member of Parliament in the House attacking the Khalistani groups, victims of the Kanishka bombing in particular, the worst mass death in aviation history before 9/11, have been speaking to us. And one of the things that they have been underlining, including the wife of the Sikh pilot who was the first officer on the plane, is that there is no support for Khalistan here in India. With that context, I want to introduce our guest on the program today. Ujjal Dosanjh is with us. As I mentioned, Mr. Dosanjh was the Premier of British Columbia, the first Indian origin politician to occupy that office. It is a pleasure to have you with us. I know it's very early in the morning for you, but there's never a dull moment in Canada, it seems, and never a dull moment here in India either. Let me ask first about this latest controversy. A Nazi in Parliament. What did you make of that?
Well, I take the speaker at his word. The speaker says it was his error. His office had arranged it. Mr. Trudeau is saying his office had nothing to do with it. It's a serious error, no matter who's committed it, and everybody's apologizing for it, and appropriately so.
You know, it's led to a lot of Indian commentators saying if they couldn't do their homework on who speaks in their parliament, have they really done their homework on who killed Hardeep Nijjar? That's the connection people here are making.
Well, that's an easy connection to make, I think. But I mean, these are obviously two issues unrelated. People make mistakes in politics. This may have been an honest mistake on the part of the speaker, who apologized. And I know him. He was an MP with me. So was Mr. Trudeau when I was in federal parliament. Um, I think that there's a perception that Mr. Trudeau made the allegations against India as a diversionary tactic from his low polling numbers. Um, I don't think that was the case. I believe that Globe and Mail was about to reveal this information publicly on their front page, and they approached the government, and the government was quick to then speak in the House, of course, and Mr. Trudeau got up to make the statement. I think where he went wrong was that perhaps he shouldn't have been the one to speak. Perhaps some other minister in his government should have done so, because by doing that, he's essentially taken himself out of the equation, out of being an interlocutor for Canada vis-a-vis India. And therefore, we've lost our top diplomat in terms of being able to talk to India, at least.
Let me understand what you're saying. You're saying it's your understanding that the reason that Justin Trudeau went public with what he did is because the Globe and Mail was going to print a story implying pretty much the same. Here's the difference. The response from India would have been very different had there been an article in the Globe and Mail compared to the head of the head of government in Canada making the allegation, right? One has a straight diplomatic fallout, the other doesn't. Secondly, on the basis of what Mr. Trudeau himself calls an ongoing investigation with a potential, that's the word he used, linked to India, he expels a diplomat. Do you think he's completely mishandled this particular issue?
I believe he has, and I believe there's widely held view in Canada that he's mishandled the issue. Don't let's not misunderstand. If India, if what India is alleged to have done actually happened, it's obviously a serious blot on India's reputation as a law-abiding international citizen, as a country. Um, and therefore, I think any prime minister of any country would stand up and speak about it. But he could have done it differently, and I believe that we are now at a standoff between India and Canada, and it's going to take some time to undo the damage that has been done. Now, there are people on both sides who say, well, some Indians say we don't need Canada, and some Canadians privately are saying the same thing about India. But that's not the case. In terms of geopolitics, I think India is very important to the West, and Canada is still part of the West. And not just as a bulwark against China. I think that's a very sort of weak view shallow view of the things. If India becomes an economic power, you need a trading partner that can be not China. And I think I said many years ago that if you are a powerful economy, nobody's going to come and attack you militarily because they all want to trade with you. They want your money. They want your goods. And I think India needs to be in that position, and hopefully it will be.
Let me pick up the point you made about the West. Here's also what's galling a lot of Indians. Now, India has said, look, we haven't done it, show us the evidence. That's the response of the Indian government. But there's also among ordinary folk a lot of, what's the word I should use, irritation at what they think is a double speak from the Western world. So the Americans, for example, that coined the phrase global war against terror, the Americans who have taken out not just Osama bin Laden, but Qasem Soleimani, an Iranian general when he was in Baghdad, who have taken out Mr. Baghdadi on Trump's watch, right? All in the name of eliminating terror. They're the Israelis. The reason I'm mentioning all of this is I'm not making a case for extraterritorial killings. I get due process. I champion due process. I'm just saying Indians don't like this double speak hypocrisy that they see from the Western world. How do you understand that being a hyphenated identity, an Indian origin Canadian?
I understand that completely. I think that there is a bit of a hypocrisy internationally. Countries don't have principle; they have national interest. So I think that whenever it's in U.S.'s interest, they have eliminated people. They've eliminated whole governments, they've in fact reinstated dictators in place of democracies in the past, not just killing individuals. But I think that is one thing, and we understand that. But I think from India's point of view, Indians need to be less jingoistic. India's time has arrived. India is respected. So India needs to behave as a principled country in the world. It will get more respect. It'll gain more respect. Muscular foreign policy, assassinating enemies across boundaries, it can be temporarily happy thing to do, but in the long run, I think India will be a lot more respected if it's a robust democracy, which in fact in India is currently not the case, because I wouldn't go into that, but Mr. Modi isn't seen as a Democrat because of what has been happening in the country.
Okay, so a lot of things there, provocative things there on the democracy debate. We can have a separate conversation at another time because it would distract us from this conversation.
Yes.
On the and also on the thing of extraterritorial killings, it's moot because at the moment the Indian response is India hasn't done it. Show us the proof. But let's talk about Khalistan. And let's talk about Khalistan to understand why so many Indians seem to you jingoistic, but to a lot of people here to be coming from a place that is deeply felt, and that feeling is seen to be legitimate. And I know I say this to you as someone who has been a kind of critic of extremism. You have been attacked yourself in the 1980s. You had 80 stitches. You broke your hand because you've always spoken out against this extremism. But here's what it looks like to India. To India or to Indians, I've been interviewing a lot of the victims or the families of the Kanishka bombing. And one of the points that they make again and again is we've been forgotten, that there's an amnesia in Canada, that Canada could have extradited the terrorists who went on to do this. Once it was done, they did a big cover up. This is what the families are saying. They did a big cover up. Evidence was destroyed. No one was punished. One man was sent to jail. Even he was released early. No justice has been done. This coming from a man who lost his entire family on that plane, from the wife of the first officer. The reason I say this to you, and you know some of this already, is that there's an emotional place that Indians are coming from today.
Oh, I understand that. I think that, but the situation is not as engineered as you might think. I think in those days, in the 80s, the community was small. We didn't have very many police officers of Indian origin. We didn't have RCMP officers or the intelligence operatives that were Indian or Indo-Canadian at the time. They weren't familiar with the language or the culture. It took them a long time to figure it out. The other problem was, of course, there's racism. I mean, these guys, the politicians of the day, not all, but most, thought these are brown guys, some with turbans, other without turbans. They're kind of killing each other. It doesn't affect the larger society. Let it be.
Yeah.
When I was attacked, I in fact wrote letters to the Prime Minister, to all the attorneys general across the country, saying, and in February of 1985, saying that there could be murders in British Columbia, in Canada, if this wasn't checked. Lo and behold, an Air India happened in June of that country. But my letters and my warnings were ignored. There is a bit of, at that time, there was absolutely ignorance and perhaps even racism on the part of the authorities in not confronting the issue as well as they should have done. But I
But
think
doesn't
since
some of
then,
that, doesn't some of that ignorance and racism continue in a lot of the commentary today? You know this subject, I know this subject, but there's a whole section of the Western media that's writing today and calling a nijjar, a preacher, an activist, a plumber, anything but a Khalistani extremist. It's ridiculous.
well, I have, I don't know whether he was a preacher. I didn't know the man. I've never met him.
No,
But I
I mean,
saw a
like
couple of,
basically what I'm saying
I
is a
saw,
religious leader, a plumber, an activist. I've heard all of these descriptions.
I saw a couple of photographs of him with guns and AK-47s or things like that, and I've heard some of the speeches on YouTube that he made, quite violent,
Yes.
and I think there is a misunderstanding. There is still this perception, oh, Sikhs are being persecuted in India. Well, I was in India in May this year. I have seen no persecution. I go to my village regularly. And yes, 80s were a bad time for Punjab, for India, and there were police excesses. There's no question. Obviously, military went into the temple. Those were difficult times. The 84, November riots or massacre, whatever you want to call, of the Sikhs happened. And those were all regrettable and horribly wrong. But things have moved on. In Punjab, Sikhs aren't persecuted. Sikhs hold the highest offices in the land, well respected, well integrated. I think part of the problem is that when you live in India, you live next to each other. You intermarry, you see each other every day, your friends and families. So there is a healing process that's gone on in India. But in foreign countries, there is no healing process. Here they go to their own little temple, they go to their own little homes, and they live isolated lives, and therefore the healing doesn't take place. And the misunderstanding on the part of the government is that they buy this nonsense, many of the politicians, from these so-called activists, Khalistani activists,
But
and don't.
if they were only to, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you, but if these politicians or the media were only to do a simple Google search, they might find a Pew Research survey that actually surveyed the Sikhs of India, and 95%. 93% said they were proud residents of Punjab, but the more important figure is the next one, where 95% identified as proud Indians. It is just a Google search away.
I, and I know that, and as I said, I go to India regularly, and I was there in May. And I know you talk to most Sikhs in Punjab, they want to run you out of Punjab if you talk about Khalistan.
Yes, that's
So,
right.
I must say, and I don't want to be harsh. I think Canadian politicians, by and large, are ignorant, and those who know, particularly politicians of Indian origin, they know. Many of them are Punjabis. They know the situation on the ground in Punjab, but they're cowards. They cannot speak their mind because they're so afraid of this Khalistani lobby and the violence that they can perpetrate.
And here's where I want to ask you a question about Trudeau in particular. The alliance between the Trudeau government and Jagmeet Singh. And I ask you about this gentleman because he is clearly a secessionist. He clearly has very dangerous politics. And you on your Twitter feed reposted somebody today saying that this is a man who hasn't even condemned the open calls for the breakup of the Indian Union. So how do you expect people to respond to this? And Justin Trudeau is dependent on Jagmeet Singh for numbers. And therefore, there's ignorance, but there's also what the Indian foreign minister has called vote bank politics.
Well, that's absolutely true. I mean, Mr. Trudeau lives or dies with the support or lack of it from Mr. Jagmeet Singh, and I have seen Jagmeet's videos that are no longer available on YouTube, where he spoke at Sikh sovereignty conferences, and obviously, I mean, everybody believes. I mean, most people believe that he's a Khalistani. It took him a long time to denounce Talvinder Parmar, the Air India bomber, and so if Mr. Trudeau is dependent on his support, one can draw one's own conclusions. Obviously, he people will believe that he is going to be soft on Sikh extremism in British Columbia.
What
Not
do
only
you
that.
believe? What do you
Well,
think of Jagmeet Singh?
well, I think Jagmeet Singh, perhaps, I have no first-hand knowledge. I've only seen his videos. I remember one of his supporters and close friends in a documentary said that, we actually went into Canadian politics, and that he was talking about Jagmeet, to litigate in 1984. Now that should tell you something. You're sitting
Hmm.
millions of miles, thousands of miles away, and you go into Canadian politics to litigate in 1984. Now, if that's true, that should speak volumes about what's happening.
Can I ask you though? You said there's ignorance, there's some memory loss, some of it is politicians being too weak because they're dependent on folks like Jagmeet Singh. But when Indians see, for example, a tableau that is celebrating the assassination of Indira Gandhi, right? When we see posters that actually call for diplomats to be killed, kill India posters, that's what they were called. When we see Bhindranwale sort of pictures at some gurdwaras, though I'm intrigued to see in the last few days some gurdwaras have begun to take down some of these images. What should we, when we see a Gurpatwan Pannu, Nijjar's lawyer, making two open calls, one against Hindus of Canada and two calling for the political death of the Indian Prime Minister. Trudeau's government can stop all this because this is not free speech. This is open incitement to violence. It's hate speech.
No, absolutely. I cannot agree with you more. I think that characters like Mr. Pannu, if he's not a Canadian citizen, I think the government of Canada needs to show some backbone and not allow him into this country after the kind of speech he made, extolling Canadians to expel Hindus out of Canada. Um, my worry is that the lot of immigrants coming from all over the world into Canada, and the Canadian politicians don't have the courage to say to these immigrants, become Canadian, give up your tribal wars or whatever you bring with you, and otherwise, in the next 50 to 100 years, Canada will be a battleground for all the tribal wars of the world. And I'm not suggesting that there is a tribal war in India, because I mean, in Punjab, it's absolutely peaceful, other than, whatever incidents are happening with drones and the like from across the border.
Here's my question, right? You say Canada should show some backbone and stop Gurpatwan Pannu, who's an American citizen, from coming into Canada and being able to organize these events. Yet every time this has been raised by India with Justin Trudeau, it's been raised several times. Canadian diplomats have been summoned more times by the foreign ministry in Delhi than Pakistani diplomats in the last year. And that should tell you something. The description that was once used for Pakistan, a safe haven for terrorists, has been used for Canada. My question to you is this: is the Trudeau government's policy basically that as long as you don't inflict terror on Canadians, go ahead and inflict it, go ahead and foment it in another country, we're okay? And when I say that, I'm immediately reminded that the majority of those who died in Air India 182, the Kanishka bombing, were Canadian citizens. They may have been brown, but they were Canadian citizens. So this position itself is very difficult to understand. Why is Canada taking this position?
Well, it's difficult to understand for me. I have said many times that it is appropriate for Mr. Trudeau and other politicians to not always take refuge under the rubric of freedom of expression, because you can say though no politician has said what I'm going to tell you. They should say to the Khalistani extremists and propagandists who want to dismember India sitting in Canada, look, you have the right of freedom of expression, but we tell you that we support and ally a democratic India, and we support its territorial integrity. We don't like what you're doing. Nobody has said that, and that is where I think that is what they need to do, and I've been saying that quite openly.
Now, let's come to the geopolitics of it. We had the ambassador from the United States to Canada go on record to say that some of the intel came from the Five Eyes, the intelligence sharing group. The Americans are calling upon the Indians to cooperate with Canada. That's all on record. Behind the scenes, many people believe the Americans will mediate, help de-escalate. But what does de-escalation look like? Because if Trudeau doesn't place evidence in public domain, people are going to say, why did you make this allegation? You jeopardize the relationship. If he places it, I don't see India saying, oh yeah, that's right, India did it. India has already categorically denied this. What is the way out of this? Is there a way out of this?
I think for a while there's going to be a stalemate in the relationship. When the evidence comes out, we'll see where it goes, and then people can reassess. My worry, however, is that the government of India has no trust in Mr. Trudeau's ability to isolate himself from the Khalistani elements who've been around him ever since his leadership. So that's a problem. And on the other hand, Mr. Trudeau is fond of talking about democracy, and there is a democratic deficit on the Indian side in the eyes of liberal Democrats on this side of the world. So I think that there is going to be a problem. What I have said, and that's not that this is my wish. I have no dog in the race in terms of politics right now. I'm out of it. But one might have to look beyond the current regimes in both countries for the relationship to improve.
Well, I mean, I don't know how that happens, and you say, I think we don't know what's going to happen in Canadian politics, but there's no
I have
immediate.
no idea.
But let me say, when Canada wanted to be tough, for example, in its truckers agitation, a number of Indians sort of snarkily said on Twitter, "Oh, maybe we should tell Canada to show some democratic rights and foster civil liberties." So there's a lot of Indians see the same issues very differently from the way the West sees India. So I just wanted to underline that, right?
Well, that's natural.
Yes. My question is this. If you think that there's no immediate sort of rapprochement that you can look at, what happens to Justin Trudeau? I think there's a lot of curiosity because from what we see here, his ratings are quite down. His opposition main challenger seems to be doing quite well. Is this hurting him politically? Is this helping him politically in a domestic context?
Oh, I think there is a perception in Canada that he's mishandled the situation. I've spoken to a few former politicians. They're not going to say that publicly, but they believe that he has dealt with this in less than responsible fashion. That's not to condone if India has done what it's alleged to have done, but there's also a double standard on that score, as you've mentioned, and we understand that. But as I said, countries have national interests; they don't have permanent principles.
Yeah, I think the consensus on both sides, the one thing that Indians and Canadians can probably agree on right now is that things are probably going to get a lot worse before they get better. I don't think we've seen the last of this story yet. Ujjal Dosanjh, thank you for sharing your insights. It's very early in the morning. We're going to let you go. You're much in demand on Indian and Canadian television right now to make sense of this situation. Mr. Dosanjh himself has been attacked by extremists for always calling out sort of the secessionists and extremists in Canada, and we thank you for that, Mr. Dosanjh. Take care, and thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.